The room went silent the moment Ronald Parker walked through the door, smiling like a man who already knew he'd won. He didn't recognize the woman standing at the head of the conference table, not at first. It had been 16 years since he'd looked his daughter in the eye, and grief has a way of aging a face, while pride keeps you from ever really looking. But when Savannah turned, when her eyes met his and she didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't run to him the way he clearly expected, that's when his confidence began to crack. Just slightly, right at the corner of his mouth. Welcome back to the Family Revenge Tales. Savannah Parker had built her entire life around one quiet rule: never explain yourself to people who never tried to understand you in the first place. At 29, she was the chief financial officer of Reynolds Logistics Group, a company with 9 warehouses, 4 distribution centers, and a reputation for treating her employees like people instead of numbers. She lived alone in a downtown Charlotte condominium that overlooked the Catawba River, and she kept her mornings simple: coffee, a walk, spreadsheets before sunrise. In her blazer pocket, every single day, she carried an old mechanical drafting pencil. It didn't write particularly well anymore. The lead inside had long since dried out, but it had belonged to Walter Reynolds, and she wasn't ready to put it down. Walter died 6 weeks earlier, peacefully, in the armchair by his study window, the same chair he'd sat in the first night he ever told her, "You don't argue with people who underestimate you. You outgrow them." Savannah had found him that morning. She hadn't cried at first. She had simply sat down beside him and held his hand until it grew cold, because some kinds of loss don't arrive as sadness right away. They arrive as silence. The funeral was small, exactly the way Walter wanted it. No press, no spectacle, just employees who respected him, a few old business partners, and Savannah standing quietly at the front, her hand resting on the casket like she was saying something only he could hear. That was where her parents reappeared. Nobody invited them. Patricia Parker wore black and wept loudly enough for 3 rows to notice, dabbing her eyes with a tissue while glancing sideways to see who was watching. Lauren, Savannah's older sister, stood near the back taking photos on her phone, angling them just right. And Ronald wandered through the reception afterward, asking Walter's employees careful, casual questions. How big was the company really? Did Walter have children of his own? Who was handling the estate? Savannah watched all of it without a word. To understand why she stayed so calm, you have to go back 16 years to a kitchen in a small town outside Louisville, Kentucky, where a 13-year-old girl had just won the National Young Innovators Challenge. $25,000, young Savannah had said, breathless, holding the acceptance letter like it might disappear if she let go. And a summer program in Washington, D.C. Mom, they want to fly me out for the mentorship. Patricia hadn't even looked up from the stove. That's nice, sweetheart, but you know your sister has her volleyball scholarship interview that same week. We can't be pulled in 2 directions. I'm not asking you to come with me. I'm just telling you I won. Ronald had walked in then, tired from work, and when he heard the details, his face had hardened in a way Savannah would never forget. Lauren has worked her whole life to be the one who makes this family proud, he said, and you're going to walk in here and steal her moment because you built a science project? It's not a science project, Dad. It's a national award. Don't raise your voice to me. I'm not raising my voice. I'm just... You ungrateful little... Patricia had cut in, and what followed was a blur of shouting that 13-year-old Savannah could still hear clearly if she let herself remember it. Accusations of selfishness, accusations of trying to embarrass the family, and by the end of that night, a backpack thrown onto the porch and a door locked behind her. "If you think you're so special, then go be special somewhere else," Ronald had said through the screen door. She was 13 years old, standing on a porch in the dark, and nobody came looking for her. Walter Reynolds had been a friend of the family for years, a logistics entrepreneur who'd known Savannah since she was small and had always noticed the way her mind worked. Sharp, curious, unwilling to accept an answer just because someone older said it. When word reached him about what happened, he didn't call the police and he didn't call Ronald to argue. He simply drove 3 hours that same night, found Savannah sitting on a neighbor's porch steps, and said only, "Get in the car. You don't have to explain anything tonight." He gave her a bedroom in his home in Charlotte. He never once used the word revenge. He never told her to hate her parents or to prove them wrong. Instead, over the years that followed, he gave her something far more powerful: opportunity, and the quiet expectation that she would use it well. "You don't argue with people who underestimate you," he told her once, when she was 17, still angry, still replaying that night in her head. "You outgrow them. Anger keeps you standing still. Growth is the only answer that actually changes anything." She listened. She earned her way through private school, then a business degree, then an MBA, refusing every shortcut Walter quietly offered her. She started in warehouse operations, learning how freight actually moved before she ever touched a spreadsheet. She became a dispatcher, then an operations manager, and eventually, at 26, chief financial officer of the company Walter had spent his life building. Every employee who worked under her respected her, not because she was Walter's protege, but because she'd learned every job in that building from the ground up. In his final year, as his heart weakened, Walter began quietly preparing something Savannah wouldn't understand until much later. He updated his will with meticulous care. He recorded a video statement, sitting in his study, explaining every decision he was about to make, and he assembled a locked box of documents that only his attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Victoria Langford, knew existed. "If they come back," Walter told Savannah one evening, not long before he passed, "and they will come back once they hear I'm gone, don't fight them. Don't waste your breath defending yourself. Just let the truth do the work. The truth is patient. It doesn't need help." She hadn't fully understood what he meant, not until the calls started. 3 days after the funeral, her phone began ringing with numbers she hadn't seen in over a decade. Voicemails from her mother, soft and trembling. "Savannah, honey, we've missed you so much. Life is too short for this distance. Let's heal as a family." Emails from her father, formal and strange, mentioning Walter's legacy and how family should handle these things together. A handwritten card from Lauren showed up at her office, decorated with a hand-drawn heart, the kind of gesture that might have moved her once, years ago, before she understood exactly what it was worth. She answered none of them. She simply forwarded every message to Victoria, unopened, emotion and all. When ignoring her didn't work, they escalated. Ronald appeared outside her office building one afternoon, waiting by the entrance like he had every right to be there. "I have a right to know what happens to that estate," he said, the moment she stepped outside. "I'm still your father." "You stopped being my father the night you locked that door," Savannah said quietly, and kept walking. Patricia cried in public. Twice. Once outside a restaurant where Savannah was having lunch with colleagues, loudly enough that strangers turned to look. Lauren began posting on social media, vague, emotional captions about family, forgiveness, and a sister who refused to reconcile, gathering sympathetic comments from people who had no idea what they were actually witnessing. Savannah said almost nothing publicly. She simply documented everything, the way Walter had taught her to document everything in business: dates, times, screenshots, and sent it all to Victoria. It was Victoria who eventually placed the locked box into Savannah's hands a few weeks before the will reading. "Walter wanted you to have this when you were ready," she said. Take your time with it." Inside were years of journals in Walter's careful handwriting, certified letters, printed emails, loan requests, more than a dozen of them spanning over a decade, every single one from Ronald, always framed the same way. Just this once, for Savannah's sake. Family helps family. Bank transfer requests that Walter had quietly declined or fulfilled and then documented anyway, almost as if he knew, even then, that someday the truth would need proof. Voicemail transcripts where Ronald mentioned Savannah's name only when he needed something from Walter, never once to ask how she was doing. At the bottom of the box sat a small flash drive. Savannah watched the video alone, late one night in her condominium, the city lights glowing faintly through her window. Walter's face appeared on the screen, thinner than she remembered, but his eyes were steady. "Savannah," he said, "if you're watching this, then I'm gone, and probably your family has already come looking for what they believed they're owed. I want you to understand something clearly. You didn't earn my trust because you needed it. You earned it because you never once asked me for anything you weren't willing to work for. That's rare. That's rarer than money." He looked directly into the camera, as if he could see straight through it into the years ahead. "Ronald, if you're in that room, I'd have documented every request you ever made to me over 16 years. Not because I wanted to hurt you, but because somewhere along the way I understood you'd eventually try to claim what you never built. This isn't cruelty. This is simply the truth, finally being allowed to speak." Savannah cried for the first time since Walter had died. Not from sadness this time, but from something closer to relief. The feeling of finally being seen completely by someone who had never needed to be asked. The will reading was scheduled for a bright, quiet Tuesday morning, held in Reynolds Logistics' largest conference room. Victoria had made it deliberately public. Board members, corporate auditors, longtime warehouse managers, charity directors Walter had supported for years, and an independent court reporter to keep an official record. Walter wanted absolute transparency, the kind that leaves no room for later doubt. Savannah arrived early, dressed simply, carrying the drafting pencil in one hand and the evidence box in the other. She sat near the front and waited. Her parents and Lauren arrived expecting an intimate family gathering. Instead, they walked into a room full of strangers in suits, a court reporter typing quietly in the corner, and a heavy, formal silence that made Ronald's confident stride falter halfway across the room. Victoria began reading the will in a calm, even voice. Several generous donations went to local charities Walter had quietly funded for years. Then came the announcement that mattered most. Savannah Parker would inherit Reynolds Logistics Group in its entirety. 9 warehouses, 4 distribution centers, the freight company, all investments, all personal assets, a total estate valued at $34.6 million. She was also named sole executor. Ronald was named nowhere in the document. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice rising, standing halfway out of his chair. "I have every right to contest this. That man knew our family for years." "You manipulated her," Patricia said, turning toward Savannah, tears instantly appearing. "How could you let this happen to your own family?" Lauren lifted her phone to record, but Victoria simply nodded toward the screen at the front of the room, and the lights dimmed. Walter's recorded message played for everyone to see. Calm, unwavering, he explained exactly why he had made his decision, addressing Ronald directly, laying out, without anger, without cruelty, 16 years of financial requests disguised as concern, favors asked in Savannah's name that had never once been meant for her benefit. Nobody in the room interrupted. Nobody needed to. When it ended, Savannah stood and placed the journals, the letters, and the loan requests gently onto the table, one by one, in complete silence. No raised voice, no speech. just facts laid bare in front of executives, employees, and charity leaders who had known Walter far longer than her parents ever truly had. "You didn't lose a daughter," she finally said, her voice steady. "You made a choice to abandon one. Walter never replaced you. He simply became the family you chose not to be." She picked up the drafting pencil, signed the executor paperwork, and set it down without ceremony. Their attorney quietly withdrew from the room minutes later. No formal contest was ever filed. There was no support left in that room for Ronald's claims, only the quiet, unshakable presence of people who had watched Savannah build something real with her own two hands. 1 year later, Reynolds Logistics expanded into 3 neighboring states. Savannah launched the Walter Reynolds Opportunity Foundation, offering scholarships, housing assistance, and career mentoring to teenagers who had aged out of foster care or been abandoned by their own families. Young people who understood, better than most, what it meant to be given up on. Walter's fortune no longer belonged to people who had never earned it. It now quietly changed hundreds of young lives every single year, exactly the way he would have wanted. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that real family is chosen through action, not obligation, then take a moment to subscribe to the Family Revenge Tales. Every story here is a reminder that patience and integrity outlast bitterness every single time, and there's always another one waiting for you. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money at all. It's becoming the kind of person who never lets someone else feel the way you once did. Unseen, unwanted, and alone. This story carries an important lesson about the true meaning of family and self-worth. It teaches viewers that love and loyalty cannot be measured by blood alone, but by consistent action, sacrifice, and belief in someone's potential. It also demonstrates the value of patience and quiet integrity over anger or revenge, showing that truth, when documented and given time, speaks far louder than confrontation ever could. Finally, it encourages compassion for those who have been abandoned or overlooked, reminding viewers that the people who show up for us, especially when they have nothing to gain, deserve to be honored far more than those connected to us only by circumstance.